Welcome to Establish the Edge. I am your host, Mike Leone. Excited as always whenever Pat Kerrane makes a return to the podcast. He's joining me today to talk sleepers and keepers. This episode will pick Pat's brain as to the types of players we should be targeting that can make huge ADP leaps from one year to the next. And I'm in a handful of keeper leagues with different formats, so I'll add some context as far as how to apply that to your specific keeper leagues. Obviously, all keeper leagues have different rules and whatnot, but I think there's some general tips and takeaways that'll be really useful if you're playing in these types of leagues. Pat, tell the people what you got going on. Excited to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me back, and excited to talk about this. I'm not in a ton of keeper leagues, but I play a ton of Dynasty, so I think it'll be kind of an interesting conversation in that regard. And working over on at NBC Sports Edge on this legendary running back series that I've got going on, the finale of that, where I actually apply this profile that I came up with looking at the 36 legendary seasons that we've had at the running back position since 2000, then applying that profile to the early round running backs and seeing basically the scenarios in which they hit. So I've kind of toyed around with how I'm doing this, but it's going to be kind of a scenario-based article. Like, this is kind of the path to where this guy becomes a legend. This is where this is kind of a path to him disappointing. This is a path to him busting. Kind of telling those stories, and then hopefully that process will let people kind of see, like, does this seem thin? Does this seem something that's like actually quite likely to happen? And just sort of like flesh out the ways in which these guys can hit that extreme value.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely some applications to what we're talking about today. Before we get into that, I do want to let the people know, as an Establish the Edge listener, there's a special promo code ETE that gets you 5% off any of the Establish the Run premium packages. We've got the DFS season coming up just right around the corner. Dink and I do a GPP show every Saturday, Establish the Million. That is part of the in-season package. So highly recommend you use that promo code ETE to get 5% off an in-season package, but it's good for any Establish the Run premium package. And yeah, the legendary running back upside article, I think, is pretty relevant right off the bat for keepers, because generally the best keepers that you're finding in these leagues are, the really high end running backs that have hit in a huge way, and getting them at a low cost is, obviously you're just looking for the net best value no matter what you're doing. But I feel like for the way you and I draft, which is typically a bit heavier towards wide receivers, to be able to get that running back upside and not pay full price to it going into another year is kind of like the ideal thing, because it really frees you up to pepper wide receiver heavy early in your draft, or if you're in an auction, spend a little bit more at the wide receiver positions, having that tied up. So why don't you give a little bit of background on that running back legendary series? Like, what are you looking for in guys that can put up sort of these epic seasons? And if those epic seasons happen, it's a situation where in the vast majority of keeper leagues, unless there's funky rules, those are guys you will be keeping.
Yeah, the bar is pretty high on this, because what I did was I looked back at seasons where guys had at least 12 games played, and then they scored 23 plus PPR points per game. So pretty high bar. Like, Derrick Henry did not hit this bar last year. Obviously, Derrick Henry was quite hopeful to have on your teams last year, but at the same time, we're really looking for even more than what Derrick Henry gave us. We're looking for what Alvin Kamara gave us last year, what Dalvin Cook gave us last year, ideally like what Christian McCaffrey gave in 2019. So to find that, basically what's interesting is that there used to be guys like Derrick Henry who were producing these legendary seasons back in the mid-2000s. You did have Sean Alexander, who's really kind of in that Derrick Henry mold, or Larry Johnson, who got a little bit more receiving, but still closer to Derrick Henry than to like Alvin Kamara or Christian McCaffrey. Those types of seasons don't really exist. Last year, Dalvin Cook had, he's the first guy since 2009 to post one of these seasons without 4+ receptions per game. So he had slightly less than that. First guy since 2009 to do that. And that's the thing that really jumps out, is that kind of the thing that's kept this type of extreme scoring at the running back position alive is receiving. And it's not just that these guys are getting a lot of receiving opportunity. What's interesting is that they're all efficient as well. We haven't had, using RotoViz's fantasy points over expectation metric, the last time we've had an inefficient receiver have one of these seasons was in 2007. So the efficiency has followed along, which makes intuitive sense, right? The NFL is moving towards the pass. The guys who are having these elite seasons at running back are getting elite receiving volume. They're also good at it. They're good at receiving. So that's, I think, the biggest thing is that we want guys who aren't just like who we can kind of project for receiving volume, but also who we expect to be talented receivers that are going to, actually deliver value on that. And then the other thing is that we do need efficiency. We need a ton of touchdowns from these guys. We need good offensive line play for the most part. We want them, if we have the option, we'd like the passing offense to be efficient. A lot of things have to come together. But I think the biggest thing is that, you want guys who are going to be able to catch the ball and play efficiently in the receiving game. You also generally want guys who are on the younger side. Most of these guys were, only one rookie, but the vast majority were young, in years 2, 3, 4, 5. So you want younger guys, which also kind of helps with keepers. These guys are hitting actually pretty early in their careers. And you want guys who you think are like hyper talented. So all of that actually fits with the idea of hunting for guys that we can keep for multiple seasons, because we're actually looking when we want these gigantic legendary running back seasons, we want guys who are extremely talented. It's not so much opportunity based, although that obviously you do need quite a bit of opportunity as well.
Yeah, and I know Antonio Gibson is a guy that we've been pumping all off season that we're really high on, where you can tell yourself the narrative in a lot of different ways. He's in college, he was a receiver, didn't do that yet at the NFL level to the extent that we thought. He actually had a decent target share for the role that he did play as a 2-down back, but didn't see those 3rd down snaps, which he might not entering the season, but it's still in that upside case for him. He's an explosive player, scored a ton of touchdowns in college, showed that he could handle the rock at a high quantity last year. So that's someone that in keeper leagues, I'm boosting a little bit earlier in the 2nd round or maybe even late 1st. Now, as important as I said it was, like if you get one of these legendary running back seasons and it becomes an obvious keeper for the next year, a lot of guys at running back do fail early. And there's probably not going to be a ton of keepers in the first couple rounds from these running backs that fail early. What I've noticed in some of the leagues that I'm in, the best keepers out there are people that were rookie receivers that were just drafted way too late. I'm in a league and it's just insane. The price is an auction league with a $250 budget. And there are people entering the draft with $1 to $5 on T. Higgins, Chase Claypool, Justin Jefferson, and even going back further years, there's a $10 AJ Brown in there, a $15 DJ Moore, who have just been kept since their rookie season. And that's a huge opportunity to me, especially in leagues where, we play in a lot of leagues like FFPC where the benches are pretty deep, but I think most home leagues are more like a 6-person bench instead of a 10-person bench. And they have a kicker and defense and a 16 roster size, and it cuts out a lot of guys. And I was in a keeper auction league where we've already done the auction for this year, where Rondale Moore and Terrace Marshall did not get drafted at all in a keeper league.
Wow.
And I was kicking myself because I kind of screwed up. I had a way too balanced team. I didn't go stars and scrubs enough, so I didn't have the bench spots for those guys. So I think if you're in an auction, going stars and scrubs is particularly important in keeper leagues because you can get so many cheap wide receivers late, and you want to get those guys. Those guys have the crazy profit potential. And this comes back to something else that you wrote earlier. This was geared towards best ball, but the other kind of 2-part series you did that I really enjoyed was around rookie wide receivers, and kind of the unknown there has resulted in maybe not those guys hitting at a huge rate, but when they do hit, man, it's such a big payoff.
Yeah, and I think we're actually pretty good at predicting wide receiver hits. That's something I always try to think about, is like, what are we actually good at predicting? Because we're pretty terrible at predicting quarterback play, right? Like at this point, I've taken a more or less like agnostic approach to quarterback talent evaluation, where I'm like, if the NFL likes him and he can run, I'm interested, and run to the extent of like Herbert or Zach Wilson. Like Zach Wilson is a guy I've been on, and Zach Wilson might be terrible, but I was on Daniel Jones as well as Justin Herbert. So, you kind of get both sides of it. But of course you can trade these guys too. So actually being on Daniel Jones ended up being profitable. But quarterbacks, I don't think we're very good at evaluating in the fantasy community. I think we're quite good at evaluating wide receivers, probably the best at evaluating wide receivers compared to every other position. Anthony Amico's done a ton of great work on this, looking at, how important early declare status is. If you've got a guy who's declared early, who was very productive in college, and then who was drafted early, that's a very, very bullish set, of traits there. Like those guys have very high success rates, and they're not always priced like that. So I think, and now, last year I was 2 on Rager and not enough on Jefferson. Luckily, I kind of moved towards Rager as the season went on, so I have Jefferson a decent amount of Dynasty, but I got too caught up in the micro of it, and we've talked about this before. Like, I think you do want to try to keep like a broader lens, and this year's rookie class I think is a very good example of that, where Rondale Moore fits the target profile, Elijah Moore fits the target profile, Rashad Bateman fits the target profile. I think even in a bigger way than those guys, because he was so productive over the course of his entire career. But still, the other 2 guys definitely fit the target profile as well. We've got Jamar Chase, incredible prospect, definitely fits the target profile. And then you've got guys who are have a little bit more red flags in Devonta Smith and Terrace Marshall, but are extremely interesting in their own right. So this wide receiver class, and the other one is Diami Brown, who fits that exact target profile. He's a 3rd-round pick, has a little less with the draft capital, but man, is he cheap. So you've got a lot of these guys who I think have really, really big ceilings. That's what this particular cohort has, that when these guys break out, they can break out in big NFL superstar kind of ways. And I don't the idea that Rondale Moore, Terrace Marshall wouldn't get drafted at all. I mean, these guys could be stars in, a year or two. So I would include Diami Brown. Like, I would love to have Diami Brown for $1 in, an auction keeper. Like that's a no-brainer to me. So, those guys I think are really appealing targets, because as long as you don't get too caught up on any one of them and you spread your bets out a little bit, you have a really high chance of landing on someone that's going to look absurd in a couple of years at the price you're keeping him at.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's important to, be willing to spread out those bets, because there's going to be a couple rookies. Elijah Moore was the guy earlier this offseason. I think he's still hyped up a little bit, but it's died down some. But there's going to be someone that everyone's kind of on. Everyone's like, that's the rookie they have. And it always amazes me sometimes in these auctions, a little bit less harder to apply to Snake, but the disparity sometimes in price between 1 to 2 of the higher end rookies that is like kind of in the same bucket. Like maybe they have a little bit better path this year, but they're kind of in the same bucket. And just being willing to kind of be humble with your opinions on specific guys, and just, okay, if Elijah Moore is going to go for $15, I can get Elijah Moore, Terrace Marshall, and somebody else or Rondale Moore, Terrace Marshall, and somebody else for, the same amount of money. So I think too, another thing you can do in keeper leagues, if you are drafting wide receiver heavy early, one of the keys to that strategy a lot of times is continuing that on your bench and having strong wide receivers on your bench and not just playing for a week 1 starting lineup. But I do think if you wanted to play it a little bit thinner, you could have an awesome starting set of wide receivers in flex, and then play it a little bit thinner on your bench where you've got a handful of these keeper league type bets. Just understanding that the ones that don't hit, you can replace on waivers with some production. Hopefully your guys, stay healthy at least the start of the year, so you can rely on those guys you drafted originally, and you'll figure it out eventually, but just giving yourself more cracks at those initial wide receivers. And Bateman, is a guy talent-wise we really like. I was going to save this for like the end of the show, but one tip in these keeper leagues too, if you have IR spots, people, sometimes are afraid to take those injured guys, but you can take Bateman, Cam Akers, these guys
ETN.
At the end of drafts, ETN, and IR stash them. And even like, you really want to channel in keeper leagues, like the small miss, big hit philosophy. So I wouldn't even, on someone like ETN, like I wouldn't even necessarily wait till the last round. I might grab him a couple rounds early where if it hits the way I want, I'm not really going to care if I kept him in the 13th round instead of the 15th round, but beating my competition to that might be a pretty big edge. And you can just stash him on the IR spot all year round.
Yeah, that's pretty nice. One other point on the wide receiver breakouts is that I don't think you really want to be that concerned with opportunity, especially when your bet is cheap. Like if you're down kind of in the double-digit rounds, you're not spending a ton in the auction for these guys. Like opportunity's not really that important because the bet we're making is that these guys are stars, and so the opportunity gets shifted by that fact. Like the gravity of these guys' talent actually changes everything around them. So like Chase Claypool was buried last year. He obviously wasn't going to have a rookie impact. And then he does because he's a stud. You've got like situations where Brandon Ayuk, we weren't that excited because the 49ers weren't going to pass enough. And then all of a sudden, Brandon Ayuk's just getting a ton of targets. He's crushing from a target perspective and looking great doing it. Justin Jefferson, worried about the amount of available targets in Minnesota and the lack of passing attempts, goes on to have this incredible rookie season. I think that the thing with opportunity and the perception, it all shifts so quickly. I mean, Terry McLaurin jumps up in a big way after his rookie year because he's a star. And we're headed into a season last year with like Dwayne Haskins and Alex Smith and like who's going to start for Washington, yet people wanted Terry McLaurin. People were keeping him. People were trading for him in Dynasty. Like he was an appealing target. He was getting drafted very high in redraft. So I think all of that stuff kind of goes out the window once people see that these guys are stars. Like all of that, they stop caring about a lot of the red flags because ultimately that's the thing we're looking to hit on. And so I would just look to hit on that. Like see if you can find a guy who's incredibly talented. And we've got signs that these guys might be incredibly talented. And they're not priced like that because of, stuff that we're not going to care about if they do turn out to be stars.
Yeah, and along those lines, we did an Establish the Edge podcast at the beginning of last season, kind of looking at guys that we should act quickly and move quickly on. And Mclaren was sort of the premise of that, where we didn't have maybe the rosiest picture of Mclaren heading into the season and then this immediate production right away. Mm-hmm. And I think the guy we sort of singled out last year was Claypool early on. And so I think moving in free agency and waivers in a regular redraft league, but especially in a keeper league, when you see anything, kind of what you're saying is happening. These guys are, regardless of the situation, forcing themselves onto the field and they're producing. And to see that early, like the payoff is so huge and the probabilities start to shift pretty good. Like you really got to move quickly on that. You mentioned liking Diami Brown as a $1 guy. He might not get drafted in a lot of these leagues if the bench isn't that deep. So if he's getting on the field and working his way on the field, move quickly, So you might get a guy like Gabriel Davis for the Bills where it didn't end up being a huge hit, but the fact that he worked himself on the field with a loaded wide receiver group for the Bills, was a pretty big deal year one. And then, if you're just moving quickly on things like that, like Claypool, you can just get paid off in a big way. And the opportunity cost is really just so low, especially if they've shown that they're going to earn some opportunities there pretty quickly.
One thing with McLaurin too, because I wrote an article about him during his rookie year, going into it, kind of thinking like, I'm skeptical of this because I didn't like this guy beforehand. But in researching them, writing the article, you just realize like he can cool off considerably. And what he is going to do, like basically, unless he gets hurt this week in his rookie season, he's going to have this rookie year that we're going to look back on and get excited about and project forward as a second-year breakout type. At this point, like basically halfway through his rookie year, he'd already locked in excitement for his follow-up season. And so you're protected by that perception in a dynasty league or a keeper league. Like this guy's someone that we're going to be excited about, even if all of this kind of dries up, because he's still going to be out on the field. He's still going to have some production. He's still going to probably get in the end zone another couple times. They won't be quite as excited. But anyway, he did cool down a little bit, but he still had a very, very productive rookie year, and people were excited. So I think, if anything, people are probably overly skeptical of the early production. Like, people aren't moving on it quickly enough. So it often feels like really uncomfortable to sort of like completely throw out your priors after like 3-4 games and jump on a guy who you didn't think was good. Like, for example, if Kadarius Toney has like a 2.3 yards per route run through 4 games, and is coming off like 100-yard game and a touchdown, Kadarius Toney's good. Like, at that point, like, I'm just going to have to tell myself Kadarius Toney's good, and I was wrong, and he defied this prospect profile that looked really bad. But he's a first-round pick, and now he's producing efficiently at the NFL level. Like, sign me up, So I do think it's important to flip on that very quickly.
And the important thing too is the payoffs, So you're flipping that mindset, because if Toney really is good, your reward is much more outsized than the bet you're making. And it's not worth it for you to be like, nah, Toney's like, I've done this. I did it with Herbert last year. I was like, Herbert, big deal. Like, how useful is he going to be to me in one quarterback? It's easy to find reasons to not move, but the rewards get so outsized. And generally, especially if the guys on your bench are just like okay point scorers, you're going to find those throughout the year, all season long. Stash the home run hitters, the big type of upside. And the other, type of player that I found in keeper leagues, if you're in a keeper league, whether it's a snake draft or an auction, it's always beneficial to go through all the keepers in your league and just kind of see where they came from and how people acquired them. And generally it's these young rookie wide receivers that broke out, or it's running backs that just happen to be in the right spot. I've got Darrell Henderson for $1 in a league. Someone else, the keepers were just announced, they kept Sony Michel for $1. So I think it's important to pay attention all season long, even if you're out of it, like work the wire at the end of the year and get some of these. I would prioritize the rookie wide receivers and the younger sophomore wide receivers on your bench, because like we don't really see, if Marvin Jones has a really good year, he's going to be at best like a small win, like maybe you keep a veteran for $3 that's really worth $9, but that's not what you're trying to do in these keeper leagues. Like, there's teams that just have such huge wins and are operating at such an advantage. You want to be one of those teams. So having these young rookie wide receivers on your bench, or the running backs like Tony Pollard, Madison, like some of these high upside handcuffs, I think have even more importance, where, you're not only betting on like the fragility of a season, but also the fragility of an off season where these guys can enter huge roles. So I don't know if it's kind of hard to tell early which running backs those you should target heading into the year, because those are guys, honestly, you're probably going to churn a lot throughout the year. But are there any, sort of high upside handcuffs that you're particularly on at the running back position this year?
Well, this is technically a high upside handcuff for the moment. Where did Javonte Williams go in that auction?
So Travis Etienne went for $15 in the one that I just completed. I believe Javonte was in the low teens, which is still not that. If he hits, it's going to be a pretty easy keeper decision type thing.
Javonte Williams just strikes me like is the clearest cut guy to increase in value following this season of like pretty much everybody. Even Jamar Chase and Kyle Pitts and, whoever high-end guys you like. Javonte Williams is still, I think, a better bet to increase in value, because like Melvin Gordon's going to be gone. They're going, like they traded up for this guy. He's going to project for more volume in year 2, then, you know, and so all he has to do is like not fall flat on his face this season. So he's like, I think, such an obvious one.
Yeah.
And I know you were kind of looking later for guys that you can get for $1
that's
or
good
two,
though.
but
I mean that's I think too, like once after we do this, maybe we'll just go through quickly, like round by round, like which guy in this round by ADP is most likely to, you know, blow it out of the water type thing. But I think that's a good type of player. I'm trying to look up some of these auction values too. Yeah, go ahead.
The big one for me, beyond, you know, in the late rounds, like the dollar guys, would be Ramondre Stevenson. I mean, we already saw Michelle get traded, so we kind of binked that. Like, if you have Stevenson in Dynasty, if you got Stevenson late in redraft, like you already got the first thing you needed. You've got James White as a free agent after the year. Damian Harris is kind of pigeonholed into this 2-down thing. Stevenson has a chance to eventually be the pass catching back for. I mean, he had the second highest career yards per route run in this class. He's a good pass catcher. He's not like, you know, he's a big back, but he's more of like a Le'Veon Bell type of big back. He's not a bruiser, you know, and we've seen now, everyone's kind of seen him in preseason, how talented this guy is. He's a classic guy where, you know, you're keeping him for $1, and next year he projects as like a committee back. In a couple years, you might have like a clear-cut starter on your hands for $1. So like, I don't think you're going to have a hard time holding next year. I think he'll probably have an ADP in like the 10th or 11th round next year. And if you're holding that for $1 with upside, that's interesting there. And then maybe in 2 years, you're looking at a guy who you're leaning on. He would be the guy I think has a big time upside to come out of that range. Kenny Gainwell would be another guy I think is pretty interesting. He led the rookie class, running back class in yards per route run, a very high-end receiver, and an offense and a coaching staff that looks like they want to move towards more running back passes. Obviously, with Jalen Hurts, maybe there's not as many as we'd like, but they clearly are not committing to Hurts long-term. So if we're looking at Kenny Gainwell, even entering next year, 2 years from now, probably a different quarterback there. And Miles Sanders is mostly disappointed. He's entering his 3rd season. Like entering next year could be kind of a make or break year for Miles Sanders, and Kenny Gainwell could be already nipping at his heels. So he's one, like, given his size, I don't think he has quite the true high end upside, but you know, an Aaron Jones type of career path is not out of the question for Kenny Gainwell. Very, very talented wide receiver, very explosive player. So not wide receiver, but a talented receiving running back and a very explosive player. So those would be kind of the two guys, and they're very cheap. Quadri Allison would maybe be another guy who qualifies, where we don't know what's going on with Atlanta now. Like, it's already fairly ambiguous. And if Allison ends up having like a pretty big chunk of that, then you're going to feel really good about that entry next year if they don't ultimately add someone else. So he's going to have to ride out an off season, and maybe ultimately isn't worth anything, but for $1, he's a guy I could definitely see be worth holding on to.
Yeah, and looking at some actual prices from this $200 auction I did, 12-team keeper, Javonte Williams went for $10. A third/4th round running back usually goes in the mid-20s about, and you know, a 1 to 2 round running back will go like 45 to 55. You know, maybe a little higher. McCaffrey will go for more than 60. I don't think anybody else went for more than 55.
So he's like not at a premium to what he'd be in a regular auction then.
Not too much. And what happens sometimes in these keeper leagues, more so in the auction than the snake, but these teams have certain keepers and they get zoned in on what they want to do to win this year, because, you know, they got 2 really good receiver keepers. Well, I'm just going to go out and fill the best 2 running backs I can. You know, people almost get oddly like even more. You talk about the obsession with the week 1 starting lineup when you draft and redraft. It happens in keeper leagues too, when people enter the year with some decent keepers, and that's their mindset, you know, is to go into it. But you mentioned Stevenson, how like next year, you know, he might not be like super obvious keeper, depending on how your league's structured. I'm in some leagues where there's a minimum amount of keepers you have to keep, a maximum. There might be a range there. When you're keeping guys, same thing, like think of the payoff in mind. You know, don't be a mistake I used to make in baseball at times was I would keep it, a $6 player that was worth 12, but he was like that was his ceiling. He was coming off a really good year, kind of at peak. And I was trying to maximize that difference between projected value and actual value. Think of again, the small miss, big hit type thing. It's almost even better to keep a guy at break-even value who has that really, really high-end upside.
Yeah.
And the other thing, too, to be careful of, if you do have a range of keepers to select, one of the biggest mistakes I see people make is forcing themselves to keep more keepers than they have good keepers. And you really just sap your flexibility. And people feel like they have to keep as many as possible. So I would be careful doing that. And if you don't have good keepers too, there's nothing wrong with keeping just a stud at break-even value super early. I'm in a league where I'm keeping Tyreek Hill at like a break-even price, but there's always going to be inflation in these, whether it's a snake or an auction, because some people have such good keepers. Guys are going to go earlier than they do in redraft, that if you get stuck, I'd rather kind of keep a stud there. But I think it'd be fun to kind of quickly go through guys that could really get moved up.
Okay. Can I do one more dollar guy?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm mad at myself that I didn't mention Darren Evans. So I think Evans is a guy where you have the handcuff value, you maybe get a little receiving value, and then you also have Derrick Henry after this year entering seasons on his contract where he can actually be cut and save money. Now, I know it's sacrilegious to come on an Established Run podcast and talk about Derrick Henry getting cut, but he'll be entering his age 28 and 29 seasons in 2022 and 2023. And we know it goes quick at the running back position, particularly I think with a guy like Henry, where it's just he's just an absolute workhorse. So you're looking at the potential, not just of handcuff value this year, but you could enter next year and it's starting to be maybe this is a 2-man committee now. And then in 2023, it's the Evans show. So for a dollar there, I mean, that's pretty enticing. And that's, again, I think that's a payoff that you can see being very big.
So let's start with round 2. I'll look at the Fantasy Pros ADP, which isn't the best, but it's a good representation more casual leagues. Round 2, we've got Eckler, Diggs, Najee, Gibson, Hopkins, Mahomes, Mixon, Metcalf, Ridley, CH, and Justin Jefferson. Tough to just pick one guy from there, but if you had one guy that could really elevate to a top 5 player there next year, who is it? I almost don't even want to count Diggs in that, because I feel like Diggs is just straight undervalued. So let's remove Diggs and assume that you would take him in round 2 if he was there. So besides Diggs, who are you taking from?
Give me the list again.
Eckler, Najee, Gibson, Hopkins, Mahomes, Mixon, Metcalf, Ridley, CEH, and Justin Jefferson.
It's probably Jefferson. Just as a guy you're
supposed to say Gibson, Pat.
I know I'm supposed to say Gibson, but actually part of me with these, it's if you've got money to spend or you've got draft picks to spend, taking running back year by year, is appealing to me. That you've got, this is kind of how I play in Dynasty, that I actually am more taking things year by year. The core of my team is at wide receiver. And then part of the reason the core of my team at wide receiver in Dynasty is because wide receivers are going to hold their value better. They're going to allow me to trade them, and shift things around. So I'm you know what? I'm on Miles Sanders. For example, I was on Miles Sanders this year. I had Miles Sanders on a Dynasty team this offseason, and I didn't want that to be the case anymore. He was a guy that I had decided to keep. I didn't want to keep him. So I was able to move him for Antonio Gibson. I had to pay up. I had to throw in some picks. So it wasn't a straight up trade, but my roster was flexible. My assets were flexible. So I was able to move that into Antonio Gibson. That's the bet I'm making this season. But if I'm going to make a multi-year bet, I almost always want to do that at wide receiver unless I think that someone is severely underpriced. And as much as I like Antonio Gibson, he's not severely underpriced. He's someone that I like at cost this year, but you're not getting everyone's aware of Antonio Gibson. We won't shut up about him. You know, it's
yeah, he was going at like the 2-3 turn at the very start of the offseason. Now it's more like the 1-2 turn, which is a very meaningful difference. Guys in round 3, you kind of know who goes in round 3. I don't want to list all the names, but CeeDee Lamb is a guy that I think in casual leagues is still going kind of like end of 3. And, you know, he's at the point now where in higher stakes stuff, sometimes he even goes end of round 2. So that's a guy to target. Other guys here in casual league ADP, like J.K. Dobbins, David Montgomery, Chris Carson, like those are kind of like Montgomery and Carson in particular, and Josh Jacobs. Those are the avoids. Swift is interesting there. You've got Allen Robinson and Keenan Allen. And then the tight ends, George Kittle, Darren Waller.
I think Swift is a good one. With him, you're not paying, you know, that's kind of the price you're able to get him at in a keeper league. You're not really paying a big premium on where he's going in regular redraft leagues. We get to see how this Lions offense operates, because I think it could operate in a strange way where there's not that many wide receiver targets, and we're getting maybe Tyrell Williams has a good year, but the rookie wide receiver Amon-Ra St. Brown sounds like he's going to be rotating. Quintus Cephas is going to be rotating in. Khalif Raymond's going to be rotating in. There's not a ton of wide receiver talent here, and you do have TJ Hawkinson, who's probably going to, I mean, he could eat, but I think there's going to be a lot of targets for the running backs. If that comes to pass, if the team's bad, if they're kind of checking down a lot, you know, you could kind of have like a Washington situation here, but Swift is a J.D. McKissick, not J.D. McKissick. That's a lot more exciting. And that's also how you get Swift being like the 102 next year. So I think he's really a guy that from a perspective of what could this player be worth next season, he is, I think, severely underpriced. And I think he's probably properly priced to a slight discount in redraft, but he's at a slight discount in redraft, but a massive discount in keeper and dynasty leagues.
And I don't think, because of the like vague injury concerns around him, I don't think he's going to get the youth bump that we generally see in keeper leagues and redraft. Normally he'd get bumped up. I think he'll go about where he would in redraft because people are still a little bit concerned. I could be wrong there, but I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. As we move down, I guess just like in your mind, just kind of like knowing the ADPs, but a few guys that stick out to me. DJ Moore has, casual league ADP of 55. Jamar Chase is starting to drop a little. I assume he will get the youth bump in a lot of these keeper leagues, but sometimes in the snake drafts, I've noticed in the auctions, the youth bump seems to be a little bit bigger than in the snake drafts for whatever reason, just the way people think, the list that they're drafting off of. I don't know why that is. So Jamar Chase in the 5th round as well. Him and DJ Moore seem like strong bats. I'm of the mindset
that's crazy to me that you could get Jamar Chase in the 5th round. I mean, and DJ Moore too is nice, but
this is casual league ADP, not keeper ADP.
I see.
I'm just going through like the regular ADP, so keep that in mind. Like they probably will go earlier, but even in round 4, like those are guys, especially Chase. Like I could see Chase being like a 1-2 turn guy next year if it goes right.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's a wildly high-end prospect. It's pretty nuts. Higgins is another guy that I like too. He would be someone I'd be targeting in that range, and then DJ Moore. DJ Moore is so talented. I mean, he was used in a way that we didn't expect him to be used, in a way that was like the worst possible. Like if we had known heading into the season that he was going to be Teddy Bridgewater's deep threat, we would not have been drafting him where we were drafting him. Like that was a real bad outcome. That was a real bummer. But yet he was still efficient. He still had an efficient yards per route run season being Teddy Bridgewater's deep threat. And this guy can do everything. He's a yards after catch guy. He can run deep routes. The only thing he hasn't done is score touchdowns. But given his skill set, given the fact that he's actually really good after the catch and he's good deep, the touchdown thing like couldn't concern me less. It's just a discount. So DJ Moore, I think I would probably even take him still over Chase. But it's like close. Those guys are all kind of right
Chase,
there.
I mean, I'm looking at NFFC, so high stakes ADP now, moving off the casual ADP. he's dropped to the 5-6 turn. I mean, people are panicking on Chase. So hopefully
it's beautiful, man. Draft Jamar Chase in redraft right now. It is, you draft him everywhere. Like if you can get if you're getting any kind of discount, I would send offers. By the way, I tweeted this out, but like it's a good time to send offers in Dynasty for Jamar Chase. Don't send lowball offers that have the person just insta reject and the talks die. Like Jamar Chase shouldn't be available in Dynasty leagues. Jamar Chase should be held with an iron grip. But sometimes in Dynasty, the discount is that the owner's willing to listen to a fair offer. So that's a send the exact offer you would have sent a month ago. Send a legit, real offer that someone will be happy to accept because they're going to listen now when they wouldn't have a month ago.
And then a couple of younger receivers that have gotten a lot of steam lately. So I don't know if you'll be able to get them at the right prices, but if you do find yourself sort of in a snake and it's like the 5th round and it's a little bit dead and you're thinking of keeper value, you know, Brandon Ayuk, Jerry Jeudy in that range, Chase Claypool in that range, like those guys definitely start to take priority over Odell Beckham. You know, they take priority over, I don't know, maybe even a Deontay Johnson. I don't know how high I'd go.
Oh yeah,
Deontay's, but
I mean, I would say like talk to a degenerate who just hates old players. Like talk to someone who's, you know, where the age model's out of control and what they're doing in redraft, right? It's like if there's people out here that are like taking Jerry Jeudy over Deontay Johnson in redraft, then you should definitely be taking him over Deontay Johnson in a keeper league, right? I mean, and I think from a payoff perspective, like Jerry Jeudy can hit big. Jerry Jeudy can hit really big. He can emerge as the new wide receiver 1 in Denver. The quarterback situation could get figured out in the offseason. They could be bringing in someone that we're excited about. Like it's hard to imagine Deontay Johnson, I think, being like a late 2nd round pick. It's not hard to imagine Jerry Jeudy being a late 2nd round pick if they get quarterback figured out.
And not to turn this into a pro wide receiver, anti running back, but like as I'm kind of going through the younger players that could maybe ascend, like I'm a little bit scared if Michael Carter and Trey Sermon get like big youth bumps in keeper leagues. Now, if you're drafting running back already and they're available, like you're definitely going to prioritize them over probably like Raheem Mostert. You're obviously going to prioritize Sermon over Mostert. But if they're getting really big bumps, because I've seen that in a couple of my leagues already where the running backs seem to get bigger bumps than the receivers when we kind of think it should be an opposite. So we've kind of moved through those first 7 rounds where you're really looking for big hits, because to get the value on that, you're going to want guys that are going in the top, 3 or 4 rounds of the draft. Anyone else just off the top of your head that sticks out to you, maybe in like rounds 8+? We kind of talked about the cheap rookie wide receivers and then also some handcuff running backs to stash, but anybody that's kind of like in between those kind of segments of players? I'm having a tough time. That's kind of where I'm getting my current year running back, like kind of just stocking up on current year running back a lot, is in that range where I've kind of filled out my starters a little bit and I've taken some really high upside wide receivers, and I know I can get some of the cheap rookie receivers later. So I'm kind of like peppering my running back upside bets there, like current year upside bets. There's no one there that's like particularly like, I think, valuable more in keepers than in redraft. Maybe one of the Bills guys like Zack Moss.
Yeah, that would be an interesting one for sure. Because Zack Moss definitely has a big payoff.
I guess, like if just something happens there in Jones, but
yeah, we didn't mention Jalen Waddle, who certainly fits, as a rookie target. And then Mecole Hardman would be a guy I'd throw out if he, like, this is the year for Hardman. Like, it's either going to happen or we're gonna, it's never going to happen. We're going to know that. So where Hardman's going, and he's right in that range. I think he's pretty appealing, pretty exciting. With Tyreek Hill, he's going to be there. Like, Hardman's probably not going to have the the huge payoff, but you could see him going as like a 4th or 5th round guy pretty easily if he's actually good and Patrick Mahomes number 2.
Do you think so? We were kind of talking in Discord about Ruggs too, Henry Ruggs, and I'm just wondering. And maybe this is me not being imaginative enough. I get a little worried that those types of guys aren't going to be the necessary target share earners to pay off in a really big way, where I think they'd be like small hits where they've got a more consistent role than we expected and they're making big plays. But you kind of need guys that are going to see 20% target shares. Do you think that guys like Ruggs, Hardman have that in their range of outcomes?
That's, I think, a fair pushback on Hardman for sure. But you do have Kelsey aging. You know, maybe this offense looks a little different in, you know, entering next year than it does right now, where we're expecting, you know,
but even
around a 20%, 18, 19% target share for Hardman, but he's hyper efficient. You know, the defense, they can't account for him because of Tyreek Hill. And, you know, I think that could definitely happen for him. I don't agree with that take on Ruggs. I think Ruggs, he was 21 years old last year. He's got the size, you know, he's right around 200 pounds, just a little under 200 pounds, right? And he's got the blazing speed. He's an alpha outside wide receiver. Like, that's the sort of prototype that he's supposed to be in. Last year, we know they used him on these option route, you know, the cars like reading pre-snap, like basically, is he on one-on-one coverage? And if so, I could throw to him, but otherwise he's basically getting burned, is running like a go route. He's like helping take the top off the defense. He was used in that role a ton, and that helps Darren Waller a lot. You know, it helped Nelson Aguilar a lot. But if Ruggs is good, and I'm very kind of ambivalent on that, he might be terrible. He might just have, like, a lot of his production out of Alabama could have been because the defense could not focus on him. They had to focus on everyone else, Devonta Smith, Jerry Jeudy, Jalen Waddle. So he could ultimately be bad. But if he's good, with his physical tools, with, you know, the desire of the team that took him as the #1 wide receiver in 2020 to scheme around him in his second year, I think he can absolutely have a big target share. Like, all that matters is he talented? And I guess the question is, like, are we confident enough that, you know, that he is to make that bet? I'm kind of like half in. Like, I have probably, I think in Best Ball Mania or whatever, I have like 4 or 5% exposure to him. So I'm actually quite a bit underweight, but like, I think when he hits really big. So I want to, if anything, I want to get that up a little bit, get closer to even on Henry Ruggs.
I'm a little worried
he could have a big target share.
Big, but that's good to hear the other case. And to the Hardman case,
you just don't think there's targets available, and
I think they're there. I'm just skeptical. I'm just was so disappointed with the target share he was able to carve out year one with the people that were around him that maybe I'm just being too hard on him for that first year. And I just remember every week, as you know, doing the DFS projections and the season long projections, like almost fudging that number higher every week, thinking he's got to start getting more targets. And he just didn't. So I have a little bit of that bias in my mind. And on the Hardman thing, you know, Tyreek Hill is in a tier of receivers who see like a 4 to 5% target share higher than him, to your point about the efficiency there. So Hardman could be in a similar boat where, you know, 17% target share, and he's going where like good 22% target share receivers are, just because it's one of the pass happiest offenses in the league and Patrick Mahomes.
But to that point, like, I wouldn't be targeting Darnell Mooney, you know, like I wouldn't be adding a premium to Darnell Mooney in a keeper league, because what is Darnell Mooney really going to be like 2-3 years down the line? You know, he's a speed receiver. He's an undersized speed receiver. Like, unless you're tied to Patrick Mahomes, I'm not that interested in an undersized speed receiver next to Allen Robinson. Now, I guess Allen Robinson could leave, but he's on the franchise tag, I believe. So maybe there's opportunity that opens up, but Mooney's also not a guy. There's nothing about Mooney's profile that says he should be, you know, a target dominant wide receiver. Like, he could be an efficient downfield threat for sure, but that's I think a small win type of bet.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Pat, thanks for being on the show. Hope everyone got a lot out of the sleepers and keepers episode. Again, make sure you follow Pat at Pat Kerrane on Twitter. You can see his work at NBC Sports Edge. He's doing that legendary running back series, which absolutely everyone should read. And make sure to use promo code ETE at Establish the Run. You're going to get 5% off any of our premium packages if you do that. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next week.